It's 7:14 in the evening. Dinner is somehow both burning on the stove and already cold on the table, and you're sitting across from your baby in that high chair, the one with the 18 detachable parts that took 40 minutes to assemble, and you hand them a spoon, a perfectly innocent plastic spoon, and they look at it. They look at you. They look back at the spoon, and then with the calm, deliberate energy of someone who has made a very informed decision, they open their hand and let it fall. It hits the floor. Clatter. And then they look at you again, not with guilt, not with confusion, but with something that looks almost uncomfortably like satisfaction. You pick it up, hand it back. It falls again. You pick it up. It falls. And somewhere between the third and the ninth repetition of this exact sequence, a thought crosses your mind. Is my child doing this to me on purpose? And the answer, according to some of the most fascinating developmental neuroscience research produced in the last 2 decades, is yes, but not in the way you think. And what's actually happening inside that small skull is so extraordinary that by the end of this video, I promise you, you will feel something closer to awe than frustration the next time that spoon hits the floor. Welcome back to Tiny Code Cracker, where we decode the hidden language of your baby's developing brain. And today we are going deep into gravity, cause and effect, mirror neurons, and the reason your baby is, quite literally, running physics experiments on your kitchen floor. Let's start with something that will reframe this entire behavior immediately. When researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences began studying object manipulation in infants between the ages of 8 and 14 months, what they found was not chaos. What they found was a pattern. Babies who repeatedly dropped or threw objects were not acting out of randomness or frustration. They were systematically varying their actions. They would drop something softly, then hard. They would release from a high position, then a low one. They would watch what happened to a round object versus a flat one. The scientific term for what they were observing is variation and outcome testing, and it is structurally identical to what a trained scientist does when designing a controlled experiment. Your baby is not making a mess. Your baby is running a lab, and the laboratory is your kitchen floor, and the subject of study is the fundamental nature of physical reality. To understand why this matters so much, we need to talk about what's happening neurologically during this period, specifically in a region called the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. Now, the prefrontal cortex is the seat of executive function, planning, prediction, and what neuroscientists call causal reasoning, the ability to understand that action A produces outcome B. In adults, this region is dense with myelinated neurons and highly efficient synaptic pathways. In a 9-month-old, it is a construction zone of staggering proportions. Research published in the journal Current Biology, using high-density EEG mapping on infants, showed that between 8 and 12 months, the prefrontal cortex undergoes one of its most explosive periods of synaptic proliferation, meaning it is generating connections at a speed that will never be matched again in that child's lifetime. And here is the critical piece. Those connections are not generated in a vacuum. They are generated in direct response to interaction with the physical world. Every time your baby releases that spoon and watches it fall, a cascade of neural activity fires across their developing prefrontal and parietal cortices. They are encoding gravity, encoding distance, encoding sound, encoding your reaction, all simultaneously, all into a brain that is physically reshaping itself around that single moment. The spoon hitting the floor is not a tantrum, it is a data point. But there's a second layer to this that is even more extraordinary, and it involves you. Because if you have noticed that your baby doesn't just drop things, they drop things and immediately look at your face, then you have witnessed something that Harvard developmental psychologist Dr. Jerome Kagan spent decades studying, a phenomenon known as social referencing. Social referencing is the process by which an infant uses a caregiver's emotional response as information about the world. When your baby throws that toy and then looks up at you, they are not looking for permission. They are calibrating. They are asking, is this outcome safe? Is this outcome interesting? Does this outcome make my person make that sound again? Your face, in this moment, is functioning as an external emotional processing system. A landmark study from Harvard's Laboratory for Developmental Studies found that infants as young as 9 months will dramatically alter their willingness to interact with a novel object based solely on the facial expression of their caregiver. Approach it enthusiastically if the caregiver looks pleased. Avoid it entirely if the caregiver looks afraid. What this means is that when your baby drops the spoon and looks at you, their brain is integrating 2 streams of data simultaneously: the physical outcome of the drop and the social-emotional data on your face. They are building a model of reality that includes both physics and people, simultaneously, before their first birthday. Now let's bring in the mirror neuron system, because this is where it gets genuinely breathtaking. Mirror neurons, first described by researchers at the University of Parma and later confirmed in human imaging studies published in PNAS, are neurons that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that same action. Think of them as a neural echo of observed behavior. In infants, the mirror neuron system is still developing, and one of the key ways it develops is through repeated action and observation loops. When your baby drops something, watches it fall, and then watches your hand reach down and pick it up, their mirror neuron system is quietly logging not just your movement, but the intention behind it. They are learning that a human hand can undo a physical outcome. They are learning that objects, when released, behave predictably. And, crucially, they are learning that their own actions have the power to generate a response in another human being. This is not a small thing. This is the neurological foundation of agency, of the understanding that I, as an entity, can affect the world. Developmental neuroscientists at MIT's Baby Lab have described the object-dropping phase as one of the clearest early behavioral windows into the emergence of intentional agency in human infants. Your baby is not being defiant. Your baby is discovering, for perhaps the very first time, that they exist as a causal force in the universe. There is also a sensory dimension to this that most parenting content completely ignores, and it lives in a system called the vestibular proprioceptive network, the brain's internal map of the body and space. When a baby grips an object and releases it, the muscles of the hand, wrist, and arm are sending a rich stream of proprioceptive data to the cerebellum and the sensory cortex. The act of release, the physical letting go, is itself a complex motor skill that requires precise coordination between the motor cortex, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. Before around 8 or 9 months, most babies cannot intentionally release an object at all. Their grip reflex makes voluntary release nearly impossible. So the dropping phase is also a motor milestone. It is the first reliable evidence that the baby has achieved voluntary, intentional disengagement of grip. Research from the Journal of Neurophysiology has shown that the cerebellum encodes the timing and force of release as a predictive model, meaning the more a baby practices releasing objects, the more refined and accurate their predictive motor model becomes. This directly feeds into the development of fine motor control, which in turn is a foundational prerequisite for everything from self-feeding to drawing to, eventually, writing. Now, a gentle but important note for parents who want to stay attuned to their baby's developmental arc, because this channel is always about giving you both the wonder and the watchfulness. The dropping and throwing phase, when healthy, is typically characterized by a few key qualities. The baby makes eye contact during or immediately after the drop. They show clear signs of anticipation before releasing the object. They vary their behavior rather than repeating it in a rigid mechanical loop, and they respond to your reaction, laughing, pausing, adjusting. These are all signs that the social referencing and causal reasoning circuits are online and active. What you want to gently note and bring to a developmental pediatrician if you observe it consistently is if the repetitive dropping seems entirely disconnected from social engagement, if there is no eye contact, no anticipation, and no response to your reaction over time. This can occasionally be an early, soft indicator worth discussing, not as cause for alarm, but as information. Healthy development includes a rich loop of action, observation, and social feedback. And that loop, when it's running beautifully, is exactly what you're watching when your baby drops that spoon for the 11th time and grins at you like they've just discovered electricity, because in a very real sense, they have. Think about what your baby is encoding in just one of those drop sequences. The visual trajectory of a falling object, the acoustic signature of different materials hitting different surfaces, the proprioceptive feedback of voluntary release, the social emotional data on a familiar face, and the dawning understanding that their own body, their own intention, produced all of it. Neuroscientists at the University of Cambridge who study early cognitive development have used a beautiful phrase to describe this period. They call it the first philosophy, because what babies are doing between 8 and 18 months is constructing their foundational model of how reality works, from scratch, using nothing but repetition, observation, and the faces of the people who love them. Every dropped cup, every flung cracker, every triumphant spoon release is a chapter in that philosophy. You are not their maid in these moments. You are their research partner. You are the experiment's control condition. You are, in the most literal neurological sense, part of the cognitive infrastructure your child is building their understanding of the world upon. So tonight, if that spoon hits the floor again, and it will, take one breath before you reach for it. Notice their eyes. Notice how they're watching you. Notice that what you are looking at is not defiance, not chaos, not a phase to be endured. What you're looking at is a mind at work, a consciousness, brand new, learning the rules of a universe it just arrived in, and you are its favorite teacher. Now I want to hear from you, because every parent's version of this is slightly different, and I find it absolutely fascinating. What does your baby throw? And what is their face like the moment it lands? Tell me in the comments below, because I read every single one. And if this video made you see your baby even slightly differently, share it with another parent who might need to hear it today. Next week, we're going into something that almost every parent has experienced, but almost nobody talks about. Why does your baby cry more when you walk into the room, especially after a hard day, as if they somehow knew? The neuroscience behind that one is going to genuinely surprise you. I'll see you there.